So snippets of his interview were uncovered that actually showed him saying, "I was afraid for my life, I was just defending myself." None of that came out in the preliminary investigation. We just sort of stumbled upon it going through hours of audio tape from the in-car video. So it was frustrating because you felt like they just kind of picked their story and stuck with it, and anything that was inconsistent with that they just didn't look at and dismissed. And so we dealt with that from Seattle Police Department. Then the prosecutor's office kind of just followed that line of thinking, and it was so frustrating because we did have independent witnesses who said that's not what happened.
That's one of the reasons why I didn't call the police, is because I wanted to, just go on with my life. I wanted him to get on with his, and I didn't know if I cut him or not. And that's the thing. And so I just, I went home and I just wanted to wake up the next morning and everything would be okay. But up until like the bitter end, I was still in denial. Even after I was arrested, like when I was cuffed, I was like, okay, maybe I still, didn't get him. I'll just explain to the police my side of the story, and they'll see it's self-defense and let me go. Explain to the police my side of the story, even though I knew, all lawyers tell you don't talk to the police, it never helps you. But I was like, no, I was about to die. I need to tell them that. They know the law. They know self-defense. I tell them this. They seem like they're listening. They didn't actually listen too well.
Police saw it differently, but of course they jumped to a conclusion very, very quickly. It is clear that there had been an altercation that had occurred with the girls and Jared beforehand, and so they made up their minds and they decided, okay, we know what we've got here. We've got a crazy kid with a knife, and that is how we're going to investigate this case. And you can see it just from who they decided to talk to at length, who they cut interviews short with, and who they elected not to interview even at all. So there were a couple of independent witnesses who gave a very different account, certainly from Graham Harper and even from some of the other individuals there. They had no affiliation with anyone, and they actually were with two other people. And after they first spoke to the police took a very cursory statement from them, and then decided not even to interview the other two people that really would have said the same thing. So the police had a much different view, but I think what they did is they jumped to a conclusion and had no real desire to go out and try to find what actually happened and really find the truth. And that's we even saw that in the way they handled Jared. I mean, they went out, they arrested him, they took a statement from him, but they did not record it, even though they had recording devices readily available, including in their car. They could have just brought him a little closer to the car. The officer apparently took notes, but then immediately destroyed them. And though they talked to him for about a half an hour, there was probably about 5 lines in the entire police report dedicated to the statement that he took from Jared Ha. We then later found out that a little of this interview, I guess unbeknownst to the officer, got captured on this camera that he had in his car. The audio portion at least got captured, and we could hear Jared explaining to the police that in fact he thought he was going to die, that he was just trying to save his own life. The police officer assured him that that would end up in his report, and of course it did not end up in his report. And it was fortunate enough that we actually found it. Really, honestly, the night before this police officer was going to testify and claim that Jared hadn't told him these things.
Thank God we found 4 unbiased witnesses that were walking by. We got their testimonies, they testified in trials, they spoke volumes in trial. But after all this evidence is found, and we have very compelling evidence that everyone knew about, that I was not the aggressor that night, that I, was chased down, that I was attacked, that I was beaten within an inch of my life. But still charges were against me, and no plea bargains came up until going to trial, where the prosecutor told me, Jared, I'm going to give you a plea bargain. Assault in the 3rd degree, where you're still a felon, but I'm going to push for no jail time. There's still a possibility of 0 to 90 days, but she told me she was going to push for no jail time. But if you don't accept that, Jared, and you go to trial, we're going to bump up the assault in the second degree to assault in the first degree. And instead of looking at 5 to 7 years in jail, or in prison, more actually, you'll be looking at 10 to 12 years in prison.
Trial's tricky, you know, I mean, it was fortuitous it did come out the way it did, because I think the jury and the judge were clearly on our side, saw the truth. The really bizarre thing about this case was that the private investigator that was hired by our team from the defense went out and actually took recorded statements from the independent witnesses early on, and they all said Mr. Harper was attacking Jared. You know, the knife did not come out until he was actually seen slamming his head, you know, into a car. And this is a guy, you know, with a good 70, 80 pounds on Jared. He's huge. They all said that. We turned that all over to the prosecution early on in the hopes of saying, look, you've got it wrong. Here's, you know, corroborating but independent witnesses. Someone, you know, both parties had no motivation to lie, no connection with any of the parties. And what was truly bizarre, because Mr. Wagner and I both are former prosecutors, was that it did not seem to sway their position on the case. And that to this day sort of blows my mind. But I think that once we got to trial, they sort of got flogged with these facts because, you know, they can't hide them. They came to light, and I think that was ultimately, you know, a big turning point for us, and the jury and the judge. I think they were all on our side.
The thing is that this is a menacing looking blade to someone who isn't familiar with knives. If they never heard of a Karambit, the first time they see it, they're like, oh my god. And so you have to kind of be aware that a standard prosecution practice is to show the weapon in question to the jury, which would mean the knife or the gun that you use to defend yourself. So be aware, if you're not just knife, if you're carrying around a knife that looks scary, be aware that if you ever are in a situation where you have to defend yourself, be prepared for that prosecutor to be kind of waving it around to trying to scare the jury into convicting you. Definitely I recommend knowing how to use whatever you're using to defend yourself, whether that be mace, whether that be a gun, whether that be a knife. Knowing how to use it will help you during being attacked, you know, like being, you know, during defending yourself. If you don't know how to shoot and aim a gun when you're defending yourself, you won't do it effectively. But knowing when to pull that knife is very important, because that can be the difference between, if you get charged, that could be the difference between you going to prison or being acquitted.